Exodus, God's great rescue story. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, it really does help us build the channel. The book of Exodus is one of the most dramatic and unforgettable stories ever written. It's filled with burning bushes, devastating plagues, miraculous escapes, thunder on mountaintops, and even God's glory descending to live among his people. But Exodus isn't just an ancient story about a nation long ago, it's about freedom, identity, and God's power to save. It tells how a group of slaves became a people, how the God of heaven revealed his name and his character, and how his presence came down to dwell on earth. Think about it, the word Exodus literally means a way out. And that's exactly what this book is about. It's the story of God making a way out when there seemed to be no way. A way out of slavery. A way out of oppression. A way out of despair. And even more, it's a story that points forward, showing us how God rescues not just one nation, but all of humanity through his ultimate plan. So today, let's walk together through Exodus, from slavery in Egypt to freedom in the wilderness. From Pharaoh's palace to Mount Sinai's thunder. From despair to deliverance. From God's mighty hand of judgment to his tender presence dwelling with his people. This is not just the story of Israel. It's the story of God, the story of redemption, and ultimately the story of us. Setting the stage, slavery in Egypt. Exodus begins in the shadow of Egypt's mighty empire. Years before, God had used Joseph, one of Jacob's sons, to save Egypt from famine. Because of him, Jacob's entire family, 70 people in all, settled in Egypt. And there, the children of Israel multiplied. What began as a family soon grew into a nation. But over time, the story changed. The memory of Joseph faded, and a new Pharaoh rose to power, one who did not know Joseph. To him, the Israelites were not honored guests but a threat. They were too numerous, too strong, and Pharaoh feared that if war came, they might join Egypt's enemies. So Pharaoh enslaved them. What started as protection for Egypt, turned into oppression for Israel. They were forced into brutal labor, building cities, carrying heavy loads, and working endlessly under the scorching Egyptian sun. Their lives were filled with bitterness, pain, and despair. But Pharaoh's cruelty didn't stop there. In fear of their growing numbers, he ordered that every Hebrew baby boy be killed, thrown into the Nile River. It was an act of unthinkable violence meant to crush a people's future. And yet, even in the darkest moments, God was at work. Out of this suffering, a child was born who would change everything, Moses. Hidden by his mother, rescued by Pharaoh's own daughter, and raised in the palace of the very man who sought his death, Moses' life was marked by God's hand from the beginning. Here in Egypt, in slavery, oppression, and sorrow, the stage was set for the greatest rescue story in history. God calls Moses. Moses grew up in Pharaoh's palace, surrounded by wealth, privilege, and power. Yet deep down, he never forgot who he truly was, a Hebrew. One day, seeing an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave, Moses stepped in and killed the Egyptian. Fearing discovery, he fled into the wilderness, leaving behind Egypt, the palace, and his people. For 40 years, Moses lived as a shepherd in the land of Midian. His dreams of rescuing his people were buried under the sands of the desert. To him, life seemed settled, ordinary, forgotten. But God had not forgotten. One day, while tending sheep near Mount Horeb, something caught Moses' eye, a bush on fire, yet not consumed by the flames. As he drew closer, he heard a voice calling his name, "Moses, Moses." Moses replied, trembling, "Here I am." From within the flames, God spoke, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." In that moment, Moses hid his face, afraid to look at God. God revealed his plan. He had seen the suffering of his people in Egypt. He had heard their cries. And he had come down to rescue them. But he would do it through Moses. So now, go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people out of Egypt. Moses was overwhelmed. Who am I to go to Pharaoh? What if they don't believe me? I can't even speak well. Excuse after excuse poured out of him. But God's answer was the same, "I will be with you." And when Moses asked for God's name, God revealed something never spoken before, "I am who I am. Tell the Israelites, I am has sent me to you." This was more than a name. It was a revelation of God's eternal nature, the God who is, who was, and who will always be. Reluctant but chosen, hesitant but called, Moses now carried a mission greater than himself, to stand before Pharaoh, the most powerful man on earth, and deliver God's message, "Let my people go." The stage was set, not just for a clash between Moses and Pharaoh, but for a showdown between the God of Israel, and the gods of Egypt. The plagues and the Passover with his staff in hand and God's name on his lips, Moses returned to Egypt. Standing before Pharaoh, the man who had once raised him in the palace, he spoke the words of God, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says, let my people go, so that they may worship me." But Pharaoh scoffed. "Who is the Lord, that I should obey him? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go." So began one of the most dramatic confrontations in history, Pharaoh, the so-called God of Egypt, against Yahweh, the God of heaven and earth. The 10 plagues, God's judgment on Egypt one by one. God struck Egypt with plagues that shook the empire to its core. The Nile turned to blood, the river that gave Egypt life became death itself. Frogs swarmed the land, filling homes, beds, and kitchens. Gnats and flies descended, tormenting people and livestock. Disease struck Egypt's animals, herds and flocks collapsed. Boils broke out on people's skin. Hailstorms rained down, shattering crops and trees. Locusts swept across the land, devouring what was left. Darkness covered Egypt, thick, heavy, terrifying darkness for 3 whole days. With each plague, Pharaoh's heart hardened. Sometimes he begged Moses to pray for relief, only to change his mind once the suffering stopped. Egypt's gods, the Nile, the sun, the animals, were powerless before the Lord. God was showing Israel, Egypt, and the world that he alone is God. The final blow, the death of the firstborn, but the final plague would be the most devastating. God declared that every firstborn son in Egypt would die, from Pharaoh's palace to the humblest servant's home. Judgment was coming. Yet God also provided a way of salvation for his people. On that night, each Israelite family was told to sacrifice a spotless lamb and spread its blood on the doorframe of their house. When the destroyer passed through Egypt, he would pass over the homes marked by the lamb's blood. At midnight, the cries of Egypt filled the land. Pharaoh's own son was dead. Broken at last, Pharaoh released Israel. Go. Leave my people. Go, worship the Lord as you have asked. The Passover, a lasting sign that night, became known as the Passover, a feast Israel was commanded to keep forever. It wasn't just about Egypt, it was about remembering that salvation comes through the blood of the Lamb. And this pointed forward to Jesus, the true Passover Lamb, whose blood delivers us from death and brings us freedom. The plagues were not just judgments, they were revelations. God showed his power over Egypt, over its false gods, and over Pharaoh himself. Israel's God was not weak, distant, or silent. He was the Redeemer who sees, hears, and saves. Crossing the Red Sea the night of the Passover changed everything. After centuries of slavery, Israel was finally free. The people gathered their families, their herds, and what little belongings they could carry. With haste and trembling, they left Egypt behind, marching out as a great multitude. But Pharaoh's pride was not finished. Grief over his son's death turned into rage. Soon after letting Israel go, Pharaoh and his officials changed their minds. What have we done? We've let the Israelites go and lost their services. With fury, Pharaoh summoned his army, 600 of his best chariots, the most advanced war machines of the ancient world, and countless horsemen and soldiers. Dust rose over the desert as Egypt's might thundered toward the fleeing Israelites. The trap. Meanwhile, Israel camped by the shores of the Red Sea. In front of them lay a vast body of water, impossible to cross. Behind them, the dust of Pharaoh's army grew nearer and nearer. Trapped between sea and sword, fear gripped the people's hearts. They cried out to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die here." But Moses stood firm and declared words that still echo through history, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you, you need only to be still." The miracle. Then God commanded Moses to lift up his staff and stretch out his hand over the sea. That night, with a mighty wind, the waters of the Red Sea were divided. Walls of water rose on both sides and a dry path opened straight through the sea. Israel stepped forward in awe. Thousands upon thousands of men, women, and children walked between towering walls of water, with the sea itself held back by the power of God. When Pharaoh's army pursued, they charged into the path, chariots rattling, horses pounding, soldiers shouting. But confusion struck the Egyptians. Wheels jammed, horses stumbled, and terror spread through the ranks. They cried out, "The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt." Then, At God's command, Moses stretched out his hand again. The waters rushed back into place, swallowing Pharaoh's army beneath the waves. The greatest military force of the ancient world was crushed in a single moment by the power of Israel's God. The song of victory on the other side of the sea, Israel stood safe. For the first time in generations, they were not slaves, not fugitives, but a free people. Their response was worship. Moses and the Israelites sang, "The Lord is my strength and my song, he has become my salvation. The Lord is a warrior, the Lord is his name." This was more than a military escape. It was the defining moment of Israel's identity, a people delivered by the mighty hand of God. The Red Sea crossing became the ultimate picture of salvation. When there seems to be no way, God makes a way. The wilderness and the 10 Commandments, the Red Sea was behind them. Pharaoh's army was gone. Israel was free at last. But freedom did not mean ease. Ahead lay a vast wilderness, dry, barren, and dangerous. The people who had seen God's mighty power now faced the daily challenges of survival. Complaints in the wilderness. Not long into their journey, the Israelites began to grumble. "We have no water. We have no food. At least in Egypt we sat around pots of meat and ate bread to the full. Here we will starve." Their complaints revealed more than hunger and thirst, they revealed fear and a lack of trust. They had seen God's wonders in Egypt, yet in the desert, their faith quickly faltered. But God was patient. Again and again, he provided for his people. When they were thirsty, he turned bitter water sweet and brought water flowing from a rock. When they were hungry, he sent manna, bread from heaven, appearing fresh each morning like dew on the ground. When they faced enemies, God gave them victory, teaching them to depend not on their strength but on his power. The wilderness became a classroom of faith, God showing Israel that he was not only their rescuer but also their sustainer. The Mountain of God. After weeks of traveling, Israel arrived at Mount Sinai, the very place where God had first spoken to Moses through the burning bush. Here, God would reveal himself in an even greater way. The mountain shook with thunder. Lightning flashed across the sky. A thick cloud descended, and the sound of a trumpet grew louder and louder. The people trembled at the base of the mountain while Moses climbed upward to meet with God. It was here that God gave Israel the 10 Commandments, 10 words that summarized his covenant with them. These weren't just rules, they were a blueprint for life in relationship with a holy God. Commands to worship God alone, to keep his name holy, and to honor the Sabbath. Commands to honor parents, to protect life, to respect marriage, to live honestly, and to guard against greed. The 10 Commandments revealed God's character, his holiness, justice, and love. They also revealed Israel's calling, to be a people set apart, a kingdom of priests, reflecting God's light to the nations. Covenant sealed. Moses read the words of the covenant to the people, and they responded, "We will do everything the Lord has said, we will obey." The covenant was sealed with blood, symbolizing the seriousness of this bond between God and his people. For the first time, Israel was not just a group of former slaves, they were a nation bound to God by covenant. The wilderness tested their faith. Sinai revealed God's holiness. Together, these moments prepared Israel for the next stage of their journey, to carry God's presence with them wherever they went. God's presence with his people. At Mount Sinai, God did not simply give laws and instructions, he gave his people something far greater, his presence. The golden calf, a broken covenant, but before the covenant was fully lived out, Israel stumbled. While Moses was on the mountain for 40 days, receiving instructions from God, the people grew restless. They gathered around Aaron and demanded, "Make us gods who will go before us." Aaron shaped a golden calf, and the people bowed before it, calling it their deliverer. After everything they had seen, the plagues, the Passover, the Red Sea, they still turned to an idol. When Moses came down and saw what had happened, his anger burned. He smashed the tablets of the covenant in pieces. Israel had broken faith with God almost as soon as the covenant was made. And yet, God's mercy prevailed. Through Moses' intercession, God forgave the people, though not without discipline. This moment revealed both the seriousness of sin and the depth of God's grace. The tabernacle, God dwelling with his people despite their failure, God did not abandon Israel. Instead, he gave detailed instructions for a sacred tent, the tabernacle. Every measurement, every material, every detail carried meaning. Gold, silver, and bronze, curtains of fine linen, the Ark of the Covenant with cherubim over the mercy seat, all of it symbolized the holiness of God and his desire to dwell among his people. The tabernacle became the center of Israel's life. It was the place of sacrifice, the place of meeting, the visible reminder that the God of heaven had come down to live with his people on earth. When the work was finished, something breathtaking happened. The cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. God's glory, the same glory that shook Sinai with fire and thunder, now rested in the midst of his people. The same God who had defeated Pharaoh and parted the sea now chose to travel with them through the wilderness. Guided by God from that day on, Israel's journey was guided by the visible presence of God. By day, a cloud covered the tabernacle. By night, a pillar of fire burned brightly. When the cloud lifted, the people set out. When it stayed, they camped. Their lives revolved around God's presence. Exodus closes with this powerful truth: the God who redeems his people does not leave them alone. He goes with them. He dwells with them. He leads them all the way. Why this matters: the story of Exodus is not only about liberation from slavery. It's about relationship. God didn't just free Israel from Egypt, he freed them for himself, to be his people, to live in his presence, to walk with him. And this, too, points forward to Jesus, the Word who became flesh and made his dwelling among us. The God of Exodus is the same God who still comes near to dwell with his people today. Why Exodus matters today: the book of Exodus is more than a story about ancient Egypt. It's the story of God, a God who sees, who hears, who delivers, and who dwells with his people. Exodus reminds us that God is a redeemer. Just as he freed Israel from slavery, he frees us today from the bondage of sin, fear, and shame. God is a provider. In the wilderness, he gave water, manna, and victory. In our own deserts, He still provides daily bread and daily strength. God is holy. The Ten Commandments weren't just rules for Israel, they show us God's perfect standard and reveal our need for His grace. God is present. From the tabernacle to Jesus Christ, God's desire has always been to live among His people and even within them by His Spirit. Exodus isn't just Israel's story. It's our story too. A story that points forward to Jesus, the true Passover Lamb, who shed His blood so that death would pass over us. The one who leads us not just out of Egypt, but into eternal life. So when life feels like a wilderness, when you feel trapped with no way forward, remember the lesson of Exodus: God makes a way where there is no way. If this walkthrough of Exodus encouraged you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more Bible deep dives, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next book in the journey. Together, we'll keep exploring how every page of Scripture points us to the God who rescues and redeems.